Welcome everyone to California Voices for Civil Justice second webinar. This one is called Strategic Communications Part 2. It's a foundational media writing skills workshop. And if you didn't attend our first webinar, I will link it in the chat. Sam will be going over a refresher of that webinar in the very beginning, and then he will move into a overview of how to write an op-ed or pitch a story. In this session, we hope that you're going to come away with at least the bones of an op-ed outline or understand how you're going to pitch a news story. But in case at the end of this, you feel like you want some more help, on Tuesday of next week, March 15th, we are going to be having a little meeting, a small group discussion where you can ask Sam some more specific questions about your story if you would like to get this story out to the media. And we also are going to continue to offer kind of one-on-one specific sessions with Sam and me on your specific story, but the one on Tuesday is going to be a small group discussion, and I will link both of those options in the chat now, as well as the recording of our first webinar. So since this is going to be a workshop, we're going to break out and do breakout groups in a little bit. So we're going to try and move along quickly. So I'm going to pass it off to Sam now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. As Jasmine said, we will be moving into breakout rooms after about 10 minutes or so. And those are going to be small groups of maybe 2 or 3, depending on whether we have an even or an odd number of people. And I just ask if you want to keep your videos off for this training part, totally get that, you know, it's the slide deck. But when we break you up into small groups, there'll be a part of that where we're working independently, and then a part where we're going to share in those groups of 2 or 3. And it would be great, I think, for all involved if we could have our videos on. If for whatever reason that's a problem, of course, no pressure. Again, this is a session on sort of the fundamental writing skills and sort of the fundamental vehicles for earning coverage in media relations. So in law, we've got our briefs. And in media relations, we have our pitches and our op-eds. And I'm going to go, before getting into that, just look at kind of the agenda for today. First, I'll do a brief refresher for those, who were at our first session, and a fresher for those who were not, just an overview of what we talked about in that first session. And then talk about what the structure of an op-ed is, what the structure of a news pitch is, to give you some guidance to move into that workshop. And Jasmine will go over how that's going to work. We'll break out for 20 minutes, maybe more, depending on how quickly I get through this introduction. And then we'll come back into the bigger group and have a bigger discussion, and hopefully some folks will get to share what they've written, and we'll have a chance for questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll jump right into the refresher from the first session, which is everyone communicates. Communications is part of everything we do. And communications is about speaking to someone and trying to communicate a message so they understand it. But not everyone communicates strategically. That's not to say you don't communicate well, or not everyone communicates well, and that's also true. But strategic communications involves really thinking about what your objective is, who the audience that can achieve that objective needs to be, who we have to be talking to, what the message that audience needs to hear is to be brought on to a place where they are motivated and convinced that they should take a certain action that will achieve that objective, and then tactics that are used to deliver those messages. And so when we talk about, that's what I mean when we talk about strategic communications. In advocacy, there's at least 2 different modes of advocacy. We're either working on behalf of a specific individual, which is also involves strategic communications, but it's with a particular court or agency as the audience, and particular client's interests as the objective. And on the other hand, we have systemic client advocacy. This is more, it's strategic communications, but with a broader set of objectives and a broader set of audiences that can help us achieve those objectives, with still the same end in mind of improving the lives of the people that we're advocating on behalf of, but indirectly through systemic systems change or change of behavior through strategic communications. And so that's why California Voices is here, to really help the civil legal aid community or civil legal advocacy community in California do both of those things. You all are experts in the individual client representation, and many of you do systemic client advocacy, but there's not as much capacity for that systemic work on the communication side when it comes to media. So today we'll be really diving into some of those, helping you do that work. The other thing I want you to remember from the first session is the VPSA message building template. And so for those of you who weren't on that, that stands for value, problem, solution, and action. And this is a basic template to help you build a message designed for advocacy. So beginning with value, we're thinking about, well, first of all, who is our audience and what do they value? When we're talking with one audience that might be, we might be talking to legislators, that's a different set of values, or we'd say we're talking to people in rural California versus in Los Angeles. Legislators in those areas are not maybe going to have the same values. So legislators or community leaders or even courts, there may be different values that we need to be tapping into. But thinking about that up at the top helps us make the problem more salient to that audience. So when we get to the problem, that problem now already resonates because it's a threat to that person's values, that audience's values. We have to be able to draw that connection clearly, as clearly as we can. What threatens that value? And then your solution, how can that problem be solved? This should be something that is within the power of that audience, especially because then we're going to be saying there needs to be an action taken. You can take some action to solve this problem. So it doesn't have to be as formulaic as this, but beginning with this kind of template helps you at least ask the questions that need answering in order to come up with a message that can be heard by, with the same values of heard by and understood and found to be, motivating by your audience. And then before we get into the bread and butter of how to write these kinds of things, earned media, when I talk about it again, this is what I really mean is it's stories or content that are newsworthy and earn placement in a media outlet. So this isn't social media posts. This isn't blog posts or newsletters. Those are all within the control of a person or an author or an organization. You have to earn the coverage by media outlets to get in there. There's some gatekeeper. There's an editor, a reporter who needs to be convinced. All of whom need to be convinced along the chain of publication for that to land on the homepage or the front page of some newspaper. So the two we're going to talk about today are news story pitches and op-eds. But within the category of print and online, there's also the editorial and the column, the opinion column, which come from within the newspaper. So we'll talk more about that in future sessions and more advanced techniques for reaching the opinion makers at outlets. But on the TV radio side, news segment pitches are akin to a print pitch. When you try to get a story placed in the television news, there's other considerations, but we're not going to talk about those today. And then feature segments and other kind of opinion segments are also there. The two we'll focus on will be the first two under print and online. So when we talk about when you read a news story in the New York Times or the LA Times or the San Francisco Chronicle, oftentimes that story, reporters get their stories because someone gave them a tip. And sometimes that tip is more in the form of a pitch, a full-fledged story that the reporter should know about and because of their beat and would find interesting and does find interesting and ultimately decides, yeah, I'm gonna write this story and reports it, finds the sources, talks to the person who pitched them, but also talks to other people. So these are really the bread and butter of earned media, and it's really kind of how a lot of reporters do get their stories. When we to come up with a pitch or a kind of a sales pitch for a reporter, there's some questions that you have to answer, and it really goes along the lines of the questions we're familiar with: what, when, why, where, who, and how. That's a lot of questions, but it's important to think about these things because reporters are going to ask these questions. And this actually comes from a session that I did with Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles last year, where we had a reporter who's a staff attorney with LAFLA now, to reporters turned staff attorney, who provided this framework, and I found it really helpful and elucidating, so I'm sharing it with you now. So the first question is, what is the news? Concisely, very quickly say what happened, what's the event, or what's the trend that formed the basis of the story. When? Is there a time hook? Is it important to write this story now? The answer to that question should be yes, and then why? Why is it timely? Maybe it's new data that's bearing on a question that leaders are considering, or maybe it's an update on a recent news story that made headlines but has a new angle, a new facet that's still timely. There should be an answer to that question, and answering it early in the pitch answering it too late in the pitch is a great way to lose the reporter's attention. So keeping the reporter's attention, that's what their job is, to keep your attention. Keeping the reporter's attention is important. So putting this at the top is critical. So why should this issue matter? Why does it matter? Why does it matter, and why should it matter to the outlet's audience? And why should it matter to this reporter in particular? The answer to that question should be because they report on it, or they report on issues adjacent to it, or their reporting history shows they're interested in something related. And that's important to demonstrate that you've done your homework, and that it might be, it's better, it might be worth their time to really engage with you because you're serious about this, and you know that they'll be interested. And then where is this happening? Is it just local? If it's a local paper, that's great. But if you're pitching a statewide paper, or papers with more regional coverage areas, then maybe there are broader implications to the region or the state. And if it's a national paper, there needs to be implications across state lines. And so having the ability to have developed a story with other legal aid or legal advocates around the country is important to demonstrating for a national paper that there's a trend happening around the country. But when it comes to California media, local, regional, these are things that you'll want to be thinking about, and having more than just a single localized case can be very helpful. And then who can you connect the reporter with, who's affected by this and willing to go on the record? And so this is about client stories, and today's session isn't really on finding client stories, but if you have one, that's always helpful. If you have a person who can talk to the reporter, or if you're the expert who can talk in generalities, at least say that you can speak in terms of anecdotes. And then how is this story different from stories that have already been written on the topic, possibly by this reporter recently? And so this is, you've explained to them the story, and then this is the way that this really differs from, this is what makes it new. This is what makes it different, even if it's, we've talked about something like this before. Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour of news pitches. These questions will be in a worksheet that we'll be doing later. So, and of course the presentation will be shared afterwards. So I'm going to move on to op-eds. And this is for when there's just no substitute for your own voice or someone's voice speaking, because there's more control over the message when you write an op-ed. So usually an op-ed is a piece in the newspaper or piece in an online paper in the opinion section that expresses a new opinion. So this is how this is different, right? Relating back to that pitch idea, how is this different? So express a new opinion on a subject that is both current, important, and relevant. And so current is, again, relating back to that question of how is this news? How is this relevant to how is this happening right now? Important, it matters to people. It affects a lot of people, or it affects few people in a severe way. And then relevant. So how is this relevant to the readers of this paper, it's really that's the question, is how is it relevant to the readers of this paper? Often these op-eds are ghostwritten for the signed author. Many times they're not, but you'd be surprised how often they are. And the signed author, usually their voice comes through because they've had conversations with the writers, and those writers write it up, and then the author tweaks it to sound more like their own voice. This is often the case in the sort of advocate community as well. It's an opportunity for control over the message. And the one thing I also want to say about being ghostwritten, going back to this point, is, for comms people in the crowd right now, you can write in your voice or you can write in someone else's voice. And you'll often be doing that. You may already have. But attorneys also, for you to know, someone else can write in your voice. So if you have something you want to say, and you're, maybe too busy with doing legal advocacy, you might try to work with us or a comms person at your organization to help flesh out those ideas and get your voice and the ideas of that, the ideas out there. Just want to make that point in the middle. As I said, op-eds are an opportunity for control over your message a little bit more. You decide how and how fervently the opposition argument appears in the piece, whereas in a reported piece, you have no control over that. And then the one challenge of op-eds, or one of the challenge of op-eds, is in a competitive marketplace of ideas, timeliness and quality are very important, and that's hard to do with limited resources. So again, if there's opportunities, if there's a desire and a will to make an argument that needs to be made, we're here, and your comms departments, if you have them, are here to help you as staff attorneys, as attorneys doing the work to help flesh out those ideas in a quick way, in a way that will be accepted by editorial departments. And so quickly before we break into our workshop, this is similar in structure to the questions that we need to ask for pitches, but this is more of the structure of an op-ed. This is a hybrid of a couple different templates that I've seen, and the links to those are in the bottom left of the slide. And so the first component of this is really your lead. It's why should your reader care? And I wanted to remind you all of the messaging framework, because as you'll see, the value, problem, solution, action framework kind of appears in subtle ways in the structure of an op-ed. So why should your reader care? And it should be framed in terms of the audience's values to the extent possible, without sounding too much like propaganda. But it often points to recent news or the discourse, something that's happening right now. And then quickly move into your argument. What's the fundamental point that you're making? What do you want your audience to believe after reading this piece? There's some diagnosis, there's some problem, expanding on the issue or the problem at hand. And it's always important to have stories supported by data. So using stories of real experiences, either in your experience, either you're talking about the work you do, or in third person talking about maybe a client that you recently worked with or someone you know about. And then supporting that with data to the extent possible. So we have a kind of comprehensive framework for, yes, this is happening at the human level, but it's also not the exception. This is the trend. So you have your diagnosis, and then you have your prescription. What are we going to do about it? What's the solution to this problem? And then you have your concession. And this sounds a lot like a high school essay, because honestly, it kind of is. You have your what's the other side? Don't straw man your opponent, but and state your opponent's argument generously, but explain what they're missing and how does it work its way back to you being right at the end of the day. And then finally, call to action. You need to restate your point, restate your argument in a different way, and call on your reader to take an action that will help bring about the solution. So when you're writing in a public newspaper and there's an action, you're either addressing it to your reader, as in the general reader of that paper, or maybe there's an action that says this other person, this leader, should take some action. But at the end of the day, there should be a step that can be taken that the op-ed identifies and points readers to as a way of addressing a problem that's a threat to their values. Okay, that was a lot, very quickly, but we're going to now break into a little small group writing workshop, and we'll have an opportunity now to look back on those templates that I'll link out to right now in a worksheet that we're going to work through. So when you get this, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine to explain it, because I can't multitask and link it at the same time. Jasmine.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to break into these breakout groups where there will be 2 to 3 people in each room, and we're going to take about 20 minutes in this breakout room. So what we first want you to do is use the worksheet that Sam just dropped in the chat, and take up to 10 minutes to work on that. But if you're done earlier than that, and both you and your partner are done, then we want you to move into the discussion of asking each other, discussing your responses and asking each other these media issue spotting questions that